So hello and welcome back once more to A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, where we are about to begin the third book. And I think there's only three books in this. I should probably have looked ahead a little bit more, but I'm pretty sure this is the final book. So the first book I wasn't thrilled with. I guess it set up the whole Dr. Monet thing, but I don't know. I feel like it could have been a paragraph. And the second book, we finally got into the meat, I think, of the story where we met Sydney Carton and we got a little bit more about Lucy and a little bit more about Charles Darnay and the beginnings of the French Revolution. And then we ended it with many years going by, and Lucy and Charles are now married. There's that little subplot with Sydney Carton, who looks just like Charles, but is totally different, and he seems to be in love with Lucy and is tolerated as a family friend. And then Charles, our French aristocrat in hiding, has decided that he has to go and save a servant who was like the manager of the town that barely escaped being strung up, and it sounds like he got arrested. And yeah, that's where we left it. I feel like that was a terrible summary of the first two books, but let's see what book three has to bring us. And book three is titled The Track of a Storm, and we are beginning with chapter 1 of book 3, In Secret. Also, my cat is down here, so if he jumps up and knocks things over, I'll be upset. But right now, he's just kind of chilling out next to me. The traveller fared slowly on his way, who fared towards Paris from England in the autumn of the year 1792. More than enough of bad roads, bad equipages, and bad horses he would have encountered to delay him, though the fallen and unfortunate King of France had been upon his throne in all of his glory. But the changed times were fraught with other obstacles than these. Every town gate and village taxing house had its band of citizen patriots with their national muskets in a most explosive state of readiness, who stopped all comers and goers, cross-questioned them, inspected their papers, looked for their names in lists of their own, turned them back or sent them on, or stopped them and laid them in hold, as their judgment or fancy deemed best for the dawning republic, one and indivisible, of liberty, equality, fraternity, or death. Very few French leagues of his journey were accomplished when Charles Darnay began to perceive that for him along these country roads there was no hope of return until he should have been declared a good citizen at Paris. Whatever might befall now, he must come to his journey's end. Not a mean village closed upon him, not a common barrier dropped across the road behind him, but he knew it to be another iron door in the series that was barred between him and England. The universal watchfulness so encompassed him that if he had been taken in a net or were being forwarded to his destination in a cage, he could not have felt his freedom more completely gone. This universal watchfulness not only stopped him on the highway 20 times in a stage, but retarded his progress 20 times in a day, by riding after him and taking him back, riding before him and stopping him by anticipation, riding with him and keeping him in charge. He had been days upon his journey in France alone when he went to bed tired out in a little town on the high road, still a long way from Paris. Nothing but the production of the afflicted Gabelle's letter from the prison of Abbé would have got him so far. His difficulty at the guardhouse in this small place had been such that he felt his journey to have come to a crisis, and he was therefore as little surprised as a man could be to find himself awakened at the small inn to which he had been remitted until morning during the middle of the night. Awakened by a timid functionary and 3 armed patriots in rough red caps with pipes in their mouths who sat down on the bed. "Immigrant," said the functionary, "I am going to send you on to Paris under an escort." "Citizen," said Charles, "I desire nothing more than to get to Paris, though I could dispense with the escort." "Silence," growled a red cap, striking at the coverlet with the butt end of his musket. "Peace, aristocrat." "It is as the good patriot says," said the timid functionary. "You are an aristocrat, and must have an escort, and must pay for it." "I have no choice," said Charles Darnay. "Choice? Listen to him," cried the scowling red cap, "as if it were not a favor to be protected from the lamp iron." "It is always as the good patriot says," the functionary said. "Rise up and dress yourself, immigrant." Darnay complied, and he was taken back to the guardhouse, where other patriots in rough red caps were smoking, drinking, and sleeping by a watch-fire. Here he paid a heavy price for his escort, and hence he started with it on the wet, wet roads at 3 o'clock in the morning. The escort were 2 mounted patriots in red caps and tricolored cockades, armed with national muskets and sabers, who rode on either side of him. The escort governed his own horse, but a loose line had been attached to Charles's bridle, at the end of which one of the patriots kept wrapped around his waist. In this state they set forth, with a sharp rain driving in their faces, clattering at a heavy dragoon trot under the uneven town pavement, and out upon the mire-deep roads. In this state they traversed without change, except of horses and pace, all the mire-deep leagues that lay between them and the capital. They traveled in the night, halting an hour or 2 after daybreak, and lying by until twilight fell. The escort were so wretchedly clothed that they twisted straw round their bare legs and thatched their ragged shoulders to keep the wet off. Apart from the personal discomfort of being so attended, and apart from such considerations of present danger as arose from one of the patriots being chronically drunk and carrying his musket quite recklessly, Charles Darnay did not allow the restraint that was laid upon him to awaken any serious fears, for he reasoned with himself that it could have no reference in the merits of the individual case that was not yet stated, and of representations confirmable by the prisoner and the abbé that had not yet been made. But when they came to the town of Beauvais, which they did at eventide, when the streets were filled with people, he could not conceal from himself that the aspect of affairs was quite alarming. An ominous crowd gathered to see him dismount at the posting-yard, and many voices called loudly, "Down with the immigrant!" He stopped in the act of swinging himself out of the saddle, and resuming it as his safest place, said, "Immigrant, my friends, do you not see me here in France of my own will?" "You're a cursed immigrant," cried a farrier, making at him in a furious manner through the crowd, hammer in hand. and you're a cursed aristocrat." The postmaster stepped between this man and the rider's bridle, and soothingly said, "Let him be. He will be judged at Paris." "Judged?" said the farrier, with a swing of his hammer. "Aye, and condemned as a traitor." And at this the crowd roared its approval. Checking the postmaster, who was for turning his horse's head to the yard, the drunken patriot was sitting composedly in his saddle, looking along. Darnay said, as soon as he could make his voice heard, "Friends, you declare yourself, or you are deceived. I am not a traitor." "He lies," cried the smith. "He is a traitor since the decree. His life is forfeit to the people. His life is not his own." At the instant when Darnay saw a rush in the eyes of the crowd, which one more instant would have brought upon him, the postmaster did then turn his horse into the yard, and the escort rode in close on his horse's flank, and the postmaster then shut and barred the crazy double gates. The farrier struck a blow upon them with his hammer, and the crowd groaned, but no more happened. "What is this decree that the smith spoke of?" Darnay asked the postmaster, when he had thanked him and stood next to him in the yard. "Truly, it is a decree for selling the property of immigrants." "When did this pass?" "On the 14th, the day I left England." "Everybody says it is but one of several, and that there will be others if there are not already, banishing all immigrants and condemning all to death who return. This is what he meant when he said your life was not your own." "But there are no such decrees yet." "What do I know?" said the postmaster, shrugging. "There may be, or there will be. It is all the same. What would you have?" They rested on some straw in a loft until the middle of the night, and then rode forward again while the town was asleep. Among the many wild changes observable on familiar things which made this wild ride unreal, not the least was the seeming rarity of sleep. After long and lonely spurring over dreary roads, they would come to a cluster of poor cottages, not steeped in darkness, but all glittering with lights, and would find the people, in a ghostly manner in the dead of night, circling hand in hand round a shriveled tree of liberty, or all drawn up together singing a liberty song. Happily, however, there was sleep in Beauvais that night to help them out of it, and they passed once more into solitude and loneliness, jingling through the untimely cold and wet, among impoverished fields that had yielded no fruits of the earth that year, diversified by the blackened remains of burned-out houses and the sudden emergence and sharp reining across their way of patriot patrols on watch along all of the roads. Daylight at last found them before the wall of Paris. The barrier was closed and strongly guarded when they rode up to it. "Where are the papers of this prisoner?" demanded a resolute-looking man in authority who had been summoned out by the guard. Naturally struck by this disagreeable word, Charles Darnay requested the speaker to take note that he was a free traveler and a French citizen in charge of an escort which the disturbed state of the country had imposed upon him and which he had paid for. "Where," said the person, without taking any heed of Charles whatsoever, "are the papers of this prisoner?" The drunken patriot had them in his cap and produced them. Casting his eyes over Gabelle's letter, this same person in authority showed some disorder and surprise, and looked at Darnay with a close attention. He left escort and the escorted without saying a word, however, and went into the guard-room. Meanwhile, they sat upon their horses outside of the gate. Looking about him, while in this state of suspense, Charles Darnay observed that the gate was held by a mixed guard of soldiers and patriots, the latter far outnumbering the former, and that well ingress into the city for peasants' carts bringing in supplies and for similar traffic and traffickers was easy enough. Egress, even for the homeliest people, seemed difficult. A numerous medley of men and women, not to mention beasts and vehicles of various sorts, was waiting to issue forth, but the previous identification was so strict that they filtered through the barrier very slowly. Some of these people knew their turn for examination to be so far off that they lay upon the ground to sleep or smoke, while others talked together or loitered about. The red cap and the tricolor feather were universal among both men and women. When he had sat in his saddle for some half hour taking note of these things, Darnay found himself confronted by the same man in authority who directed the guard to open the barrier. Then he delivered to the escort, both drunk and sober, a receipt for the escorted and told him to dismount. He did, and the two patriots, leading his tired horse, turned and rode away without going into the city. Charles accompanied his conductor into a guard-room smelling of common wine and tobacco, where certain soldiers and patriots, asleep and awake, drunk and sober, and in various neutral states between sleeping and waking, drunk and sober, were standing and lying about. The light in the guardhouse, half derived from the waning oil lamps of the night and half from the overcast day, was in a correspondingly uncertain condition. Some registers were lying open on a desk, and an officer of a coarse, dark aspect presided over these. "Citizen Defarge," he said to Darnay's conductor as he took a slip of paper, "is this the emigrant Evermonde?" "This is the man." "Your age, Evermonde?" 37. "Are you married, Evermonde?" "Yes." "Where were you married?" "In England." "Without a doubt. Where is your wife, Evermonde?" "In England." "Without a doubt. You are consigned, Evermonde, to the prison of La Force." "Good heavens!" said Charles. "Under what law, and for what offense?" We have a before the prison tribunal picture. Looks like no trial, just a tribunal. The officer looked up from his slip of paper for a moment. "We have new laws, Evermonde, and new offenses since you were here." He said this with a smile and went on writing. "I entreat you to observe that I have come here voluntarily in response to that written appeal of a fellow citizen which is in front of you. I have come here to clear him and to clear myself. I demand no more than the opportunity to do so without delay. Is this not my right?" "Emigrants have no rights, Evermonde," was the reply. The officer wrote until he had finished, read over to himself what he had written, sanded it, and handed it to Citizen Defarge with the words, "In secret." Citizen Defarge motioned with the paper to the prisoner that he must accompany him. The prisoner obeyed, and a guard of 2 armed patriots attended them. "It is you," said Defarge in a low voice as they went down the guardhouse steps and turned into Paris, "who married the daughter of Dr. Manette, once a prisoner in the Bastille, who is no more." "Yes," said Darnay. "My name is Defarge, and I keep a wine shop in the Quarter Saint Antoine. Possibly you have heard of me." "My wife came to your house to reclaim her father. Yes." The word wife seemed to serve as a gloomy reminder to Citizen Defarge to say with a sudden impatience, "In the name of that sharp, newly born female called La Guillotine, why did you come to France?" "You heard me say why, a minute ago. Do you not believe it is the truth?" "A bad truth for you," said Defarge, with a knitted brow. "Indeed. I am lost here. All is so unprecedented, and so changed, so sudden and unfamiliar, that I am absolutely lost. Will you render me a bit of help?" "None," said Citizen Defarge, looking straight in front of him. "Will you answer me a single question?" "Perhaps, according to its nature. You can say what it is." "In this prison that I am going to so unjustly, shall I have some free communication with the world outside?" "You will see." "I am not to be buried there, prejudged, and without any means of presenting my case?" "You will see. But what then? Other people have been similarly buried in worse prisons before you." "But never by me, Citizen Defarge." Citizen Defarge glanced darkly at him for an answer and walked on in a steady, set silence. The deeper he sank into this silence, the fainter hope there was, or so Charles thought, of his softening in any degree. He therefore quickly said, "It is of the utmost importance to me. You know, citizen, even better than I, of how much importance, that I should be able to communicate to Mr. Lorry of Tellson's Bank, an English gentleman who is now in Paris, the simple fact, without comment, that I have been thrown into the prison of La Force. Will you cause that to be done for me?" "I will do," said Defarge, "nothing for you. My duty is to my country and the people. I am the sworn servant of both against you. I will do nothing for you." Charles Darnay felt it hopeless to entreat him further, and his pride was also touched. As they walked on in silence, he could not see but how used the people were to the spectacle of prisoners in the streets. The children scarcely noticed him. A few passers turned their heads, and a few shook fingers at him as an aristocrat. Otherwise, that a man in good clothes should be going to prison was no more remarkable than that a laborer in working clothes should be going to work. In one narrow, dark, and dirty street through which they passed, an excited orator, mounted upon a stool, was addressing an excited audience with the crimes against the people about the king and the royal family. The few words that he caught from this man's lips first made it known to Charles Darnay that the king was in prison, and that the foreign ambassadors had one and all left Paris. On the road, except at Beauvais, he had heard absolutely nothing. The escort and the universal watchfulness had totally isolated him. That he had fallen among greater dangers than those which had developed themselves when he left England, he of course knew now. The peril had thickened about him fast, and it might thicken faster and faster yet. He knew that now. He could not but admit to himself that he might not have made this journey if he could have foreseen the events of the last few days. And yet his misgivings were not so dark as imagined by light of this later time that would appear. Troubled as the future was, it was unknown, and in its obscurity there was ignorant hope. The horrible massacre, days and nights long, which, within a few rounds of the clock, was to have set a great mark of blood upon the blessed garnering of time of harvest, was as far out of his knowledge as if it had been 100,000 years away. The sharp female, newly born, called La Guillotine, was hardly known to him or the generality of people by name. The frightful deeds that were soon to be done were probably unimagined at that time in the brains of the doers. How could they have a place in the shadowy conceptions of his gentle mind? Of unjust treatment in detention and hardship, and in cruel separation from his wife and child, he foreshadowed the likelihood or certainty, but beyond this he dreaded nothing distinctly. With this on his mind, which was enough to carry into a dreary prison courtyard, Charles arrived at the prison in La Force. A man with a bloated face opened the strong wicket, to whom Defarge presented the emigrant Evermond. "What the devil? How many more of them?" said the man with the bloated face. Defarge took his receipt, written without noticing the exclamation, and withdrew with his fellow patriots. "What the devil, I say again," said the jailer. "How many more?" The jailer's wife, who had no answer to that question, merely replied, "One must have patience, my dear." 3 turnkeys, who entered responsive to a bell that she rang, echoed that sentiment, and one said, "For the love of liberty," which sounded in that place like an inappropriate conclusion. The prison of La Force was a dark, gloomy prison, filthy, with a horrible smell of foul sleep in it. Extraordinary how soon the noisome flavor of imprisoned sleep becomes manifest in all such places. "In secret, too," grumbled the jailer, "as if I was not already full to bursting." He stuck the paper in a file, in ill humor, and Charles Darnay awaited his further pleasure for half an hour, sometimes pacing to and fro in the strong arched room, sometimes resting on a stone seat, in either case determined to be imprinted upon the memory of the chief and his subordinates. "Come," said the chief at length, "come with me, emigrant." Through the dismal prison twilight, his new charge accompanied him by corridor and staircase, many doors clanging and locking behind them, until they came into a large, low, vaulted chamber, crowded with prisoners of both sexes. The women were seated at a long table, reading, writing, knitting, and sewing and embroidering. The men were, for the most part, standing behind their chairs or lingering up and down the room. In the instinctive association of prisoners with shameful crime and disgrace, the newcomer recoiled from this company. But the crowning unreality of his long unreal ride was there all at once rising to receive him, with every refinement of manner known to the time, and with all the engaging graces and courtesies of normal life. So strangely clouded were these refinements by the prison manners and gloom, so spectral did they become in the inappropriate squalor and misery through which they were seen, that Charles Darnay seemed to stand in a company of the dead. Ghosts, all of them. The ghost of beauty, the ghost of stateliness, the ghost of elegance, the ghost of pride, frivolity, wit, youth, the ghost of age, all waiting their dismissal from the desolate shore, all turning on him eyes that were changed by the death they had died in coming here. It struck him motionless. The jailer standing at his side, and the other jailers moving about, who would have been well enough as to appearance in the ordinary exercise of their function, looked so extravagantly coarse contrasted with the souring mothers and blooming daughters who were there, with the apparitions of coquettes, the young beauty, and the mature woman delicately bred, that the aversion of all experience and likelihood which the scene of shadows presented was heightened to its utmost. Surely they were ghosts. Surely the long, unreal ride, some progress of disease, had brought him to these gloomy ghosts. "In the name of the assembled companions in misfortune," said a gentleman of courtly appearance and address, coming forward, "I have the honor of giving you welcome to La Force, and of condoling you on the calamity that has brought you amongst us. May it soon terminate happily. It would be an impertinence elsewhere, but it is not so here, to ask your name and condition." Charles roused himself and gave the required information in words as suitable as he could find. "But I hope," said the gentleman, following the chief jailer with his eyes, "that you are not in secret?" "I do not understand the meaning of the term, but I have heard them say it." "Ah, what a pity. We so much regret it, but take courage. Several members of our society have been in secret at first, and it has lasted but a short time." Then he added, raising his voice, "I grieve to inform the society, in secret." There was a murmur of commiseration as Charles Darnay crossed the room to a gated door where the jailer awaited him, and many voices, among which the soft, compassionate voices of women were conspicuous, gave him good wishes and encouragement. He turned at the gated door to render the thanks of his heart. It closed under the jailer's hand, and the apparitions vanished from his sight forever. The door opened on a small stone staircase leading upward. When they had ascended 40 steps, the prisoner of half an hour already counting them, the jailer opened a low black door, and they passed into a solitary cell. It struck cold and damp, but it was not dark. "Yours," said the jailer. "What am I, and why am I confined alone?" "How do I know?" "Can I buy an ink, pen, and paper?" "Such are not my orders. You will be visited and can ask then. At present you may buy your food, nothing more." They were in the cell, a chair, table, and a straw mattress. As the jailer made a general inspection of these objects and of the four walls before leaving, a wandering fancy wandered through the mind of the prisoner leaning against the wall opposite him, that this jailer was so unwholesomely bloated, both in face and person, as to look like a man who had been drowned and filled with water. When the jailer was gone, he thought in the same wandering way, "Now I am left as for dead." Stopping then to look down at the mattress, he turned from it with a sick feeling and thought, "And here, in these crawling creatures, is the first condition of the body after death." 5 paces by 4.5. 5 paces by 4.5. 5 paces by 4.5. The prisoner walked to and fro in his cell, counting its measurement, and the roar of the city arose like muffled drums with a wild swell of voices added to it. He made shoes. He made shoes. The prisoner counted the measurement again and paced faster to draw his mind with him from that latter repetition. The ghosts that vanished when the door closed. There was one among them, the appearance of a lady dressed in black, who was leaning on the window, and she had a light shining upon her golden hair, and she looked like— Let us ride on again, for God's sake, through the illuminated villages, with the people all awake. He made shoes. He made shoes. 5 paces by 4.5. With those scraps tossing and rolling upwards from the depths of his mind, the prisoner walked faster and faster, obstinately counting and counting, and the roar of the city changed to this extent, that it still rolled in like muffled drums, but with the wail of voices he knew, in the swell that rose above them. And that is the end of chapter 1 of book 3, where, I would hate to say I told you so to Charles Darnay, but dude, you know that they're killing the nobles, and you go back. I think maybe he should have just sent a representative to get his servant out, if that was what his goal was, but yeah, it wasn't the brightest of all moves. Also, I'm assuming that the person who was leaning on the window, her name was just a series of asterisks. Maybe it was supposed to be Marie Antoinette. Who knows? I'm still lost on a lot of the things in this story, but that was a pretty good chapter. So thank you, as always, for listening. I really do appreciate it. This is not the easiest book to get through. Definitely think this is going to be my last Dickens, at least for a long time. But thank you for being here. Please do hit the thumbs up on your way out, and I will see you tomorrow.